Okay. Been working on this all morning, trying to get this online deal to work. So you're gonna want to have your blue notes handy. This first video is going to be over the battles of Monte, Cassino, and Anzio in the Italian campaign. We started talking about these on Friday, but I want to make sure we review, and I got a couple of video clips to show. Hopefully that will be informative. So I'm going to screen share a PowerPoint if it will work. All right, so here's a map of the Italian campaign, and here's this Gustav line, G-U-S-T-A-V, Gustav line, which was German defenses across the Italian peninsula. And so here's the American 8th Army. You see British, Polish. They were fighting despite the fact that their country had already been conquered by the Russians and the Germans. And so here were the German defenses in this mountainous region around, on the path to Rome. So Rome is the objective up here, and we're stalemated by the Germans. And so what will happen is we will land troops at Anzio with the idea that we can break through maybe to Rome or cut off German supplies running towards Cassino. So here's a picture of the Abbey at Monte Cassino. And remember, the Allies bombed it strategically. So I have a little video clip that will talk about that. Sorry, every time I switch which screen to share, it's going to take a second.
The Abbey on the crest of Monte Cassino. Before we take you through each phase of its bombing, we visit an abbey in Kent for an exclusive interview granted by the Lord Abbot of Kershaw and Ashton. Head of an Anglican community of Benedictine monks, the abbot makes these observations.
Benedictine monks all over the world will regret the destruction of the abbey on Monte Cassino, for it was there that St. Benedict wrote the rule, which is that of all Benedictine monks. Regrettable though the bombing and shelling the monastery may be, it would appear that our military leaders had no choice in the matter. If its preservation would have meant the prolonging of the war, or the loss of perhaps hundreds of our soldiers, its destruction was more than justified.
On February the 14th, the Allied command took steps to warn the occupants of the impending bombardment. This took the form of leaflets printed in Italian and English to be dropped over the building by special shells. This warning was made to enable Italian refugees and all those other than the enemy to seek shelter away from the monastery. German soldiers were known to be using the great building as an observation post. They made it the main bastion of the Gustav line. The leaflets were scattered over the building in this manner. On the following day, fortresses, Mitchells and marauders, a squadron at a time, showered high explosives on the abbey every 20 minutes or so. After careful deliberation and with every reluctance, the decision was executed. Another wave comes. For 2 hours, the blows were maintained. The German troops were by now reported to be seeking escape. Shell fire was added to pepper the slopes and demolish other hideouts on the massif. Sound cameras catch this amazing scene.
All right, well, you get the idea. Okay, now okay. Kind of a pain, so sorry about that. Okay, so there's the Abbey rebuilt, thankfully. So the operation at Anzio was kind of a mess. We landed troops here with the idea of our forces breaking through at at Cassino, and going up these two paths through the mountains towards Rome, because this is a very mountainous region. So we have Highway 6 and Highway 7. And the idea was we could land here at Anzio and quickly break out towards Rome, or at least cut off German supplies to Cassino. However, this didn't quite work as planned. The American commander, his name was Lucas, was not in love with the plan. He thought his forces would be too far extended and that the German counterattack would be terrible. So he just established a beachhead. He just landed his troops there and kind of hunkered down, waiting for a German attack instead of going on the offensive. Scouts came back to him and said that the road to Rome was open, and if he would have been aggressive, like maybe like a George Patton, he could have made it to Rome, we think. But of course, we can say that now. Obviously, back then, that was the lives of his men, and he was way too timid for this job. I think most people would agree on that. Anyway, Winston Churchill had said, "I hoped we were hurling a wildcat into the battle. Instead, it was a whale," meaning a stranded whale, a beached whale, having no fight. So Anzio was pretty much a debacle. We just got hammered. We were on the low ground in the marsh area, and the Germans had the high ground with their big guns and just pelted our men, and it was terrible. The Germans had heavy losses too, because they kept attacking us. One historian said some of the German counteroffensives were like the charge of the Light Brigade without horses, just sheer slaughter. So the Anzio battle was a mess on both sides. I do have a video clip I'll share with you that shows some of the big guns that the Germans had in Italy. As soon as I find it.
1944, the Allied forces in Italy came under fire from enormously powerful German super-heavy artillery. The massive, high-explosive shells were fired from two huge railway guns located almost 30 miles away. The Allied troops on the receiving end of these guns christened the two monstrous weapons Anzio Annie and the Anzio Express. The two German guns were Type K5E railguns that had originally been sent to Italy for shipment to the Africa Corps in Tunisia. The Tunisian campaign had ended before they could be shipped, so the two monstrous guns were pressed instead into service in Italy. The K5 railgun.
So these guns were originally meant to fight the Americans and the British in Africa during Operation Torch, but we won too quickly, so they were in Italy, and so the Germans used them against us there.
Was considered one of the finest railguns ever produced.
Oh, and the German subtitles, I can't figure out how to turn them off, so very helpful if you can read German.
In Italy, they were to prove the point.
Hitler liked big guns.
This is a German K5 railroad gun. It's called Leopold. During the Anzio campaign, it was also known as Anzio Annie. It'll fire a 520-pound projectile 31 miles with very great accuracy. This particular gun had a sister gun named Dorothy. During the French campaign, at the end of the French campaign, the two guns were taken down to the coast near Calais, and they shelled Great Britain from France.
The first K5 gun had entered service in 1936 and remained in production until 1945. The final number produced is now uncertain, but it is believed that between 25 and 28 were made. In almost every way, the K5 was a sound, thorough design, with excellent ammunition handling equipment and a long, slender barrel that provided the gun with its German nickname, Schlanke Bertha, or Slim Bertha. Every hour, the K5E could
Look at
hurl
those
8
shell
11-inch
casings.
shells weighing approximately 250 pounds, just over 38 miles. But this enormous firepower required a huge logistical tail with its own complete railway train. Besides the specially designed rail carriage for Slim Bertha itself, the train included an ammunition wagon, a railway car for the crew, a railway car for equipment, various support cars, and of course, a locomotive to pull the enormous load. As the war progressed and the Luftwaffe lost control of the skies, flak wagons were added to the train to provide anti-aircraft cover for this most tempting target. The blasts from the gun would rattle windows a mile away. After the round left the barrel, a forward artillery spotter located up to 35 miles away, nearer to the target, would observe the fall of the shot and would radio any corrections to the gunnery officer. New settings would be calculated, and the whole elaborate procedure would start again.
It was a very difficult and complex exercise to bring a gun like a railway gun into operation for a tactical situation such as existed around the Anzio beachheads. These guns were really designed to be deployed in sieges, and in this instance it was a kind of siege, but really they were deployed in a role of providing harassing fire. So what it meant was obviously the gunners with the gun couldn't see, because they were so far away, how the shells were actually landing. The guns were between 25 and 35 miles away from the site where the shells would actually land. So what they needed was an observer close to the beachhead who would observe where the shells landed and then radio the guns, who would then make any necessary adjustments in how the guns were aimed in order to try and achieve greater accuracy.
The two guns, which became known as Anzio Annie and the Anzio Express, were sent south to the Anzio area via Rome at the end of January 1944. Finding a location for the guns and their trains was the first priority. This position selected was not far from Albano, on the main Rome to Nettuno railway line, at points where the track entered tunnels. The advantage of the K5E was that it could be kept under cover in the tunnel, being pushed out to fire and immediately pulled back in again once the huge round had been fired. The fire from the guns was so regular that the Allied troops immediately assumed they faced only a single weapon, despite the fact the two guns were actually involved. For 4 months, the two guns made the lives of the Allied soldiers in the Anzio beachhead extremely uncomfortable. A constant traffic of devastatingly high explosive shells was fired into the claustrophobic confines of the beachhead. In conjunction with the two big guns, a constant bombardment from lighter artillery units added to the misery.
There was a lot of very effective, constant artillery fire coming down on the beachhead at Anzio.
All right, so you get the idea there as well. So the Germans are firing these massive guns, as well as their 88s, which was their standard artillery, down on the beachhead, and the Americans and the British were bearing the brunt of that. And that's why it was essential that the American commander get us out of there. Instead, he hunkered down, and we endured these artillery barrages. So that concludes the section on Cassino and Anzio, and I'll do another video on Operation Overlord, which was D-Day.